Hey guys, Chris here from Lifeline EMS Training. Today we're going to talk about persistent refractory VFib, and really we're going to focus on the electrical management of persistent refractory VFib, or I like to call it stubborn VFib, or the VFib that just keeps coming back for more. So we're going to talk about pads placement and time. And when we talk about time, we're talking about refractory time. So we're going to talk about changing pads, getting new perspectives, and then kind of revisit a little bit of the quick combo pads that we've all moved to. So defibrillation is essentially the control delete or the reset of a heart that is in a ventricular dysrhythmia, specifically VFib or pulseless VTach. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to use an electrical impulse or discharge to reset those heart cells, have them become organized again and stop being in disarray. So if you think about the electricity within your heart, it is gone disarray, it's disorganized, it's not functioning nice and rhythmically. What do we need to do? Well, we need to reset it. So if you think about like your phone, right? When your phone gets all jacked up, what do? You do a hard reset. What do you do there? Well, you hit the power button, volume up, or home button, power, home button, volume up, depending on which version or brand you have, and you hold it down for 10 seconds. And then it powers down and then it turns back on. And hopefully it's working correctly again. And we'll talk about that a little bit more and how that relates to the heart here in a little bit. But essentially, what we're doing is we're trying to discharge a massive amount of energy across those heart cells so that they kind of reset, kind of kick back in line. So this one time, back in the day, we used to use paddles. And one of the cool things about paddles, besides looking cool when you took two paddles, squirt some defib gel in between them, took your thumb, dialed over to the energy, and then charged up with your other thumb, and then you held them onto the patient's chest in the appropriate location, you also were supposed to push down with 25 pounds of pressure. So push down onto the chest with that pressure to get past the hair, compress some of the adipose tissue, and get theoretically close to the heart so you didn't lose any of that energy. So we would take the paddles, push down with 25 pounds of pressure, and then push the two shock buttons together to deliver that energy. Now then we take the paddles off, re-click them back in, start CPR. In some cases, we did stack shocks where we shocked them 3 times in a row. We won't get into that part today, but the part I want to highlight is we used to take paddles and push down on them into the skin and deliver the energy. And so it looked really cool, right, when you were doing it. Now we take essentially glorified stickers and we put the stickers onto the chest. And in this instance here in this picture, this person just randomly happens to, like completely shave their chest. So it's very convenient. They're very in shape, so it's very easy to place. But don't forget, and we'll highlight this here in a second, when crap hits the fan and the stickers come out, the patient codes right in front of you. If you're not prepared for that mentally, what happens to those stickers? They can get placed anywhere, right? Like on the right deltoid, on the left hip. The farther they are away from the heart, the more energy you lose. So location is key because what we're doing is we're taking electrical energy and we're turning it into hopefully a vector-based reset on the heart. But that energy is not specific to heart tissue. So it actually can create mechanical conversion with muscle groups around it. That's why some patients, when you shock them, will actually have a twitch or jolt or jerk, depending how far those pads are away from each other. And depending on how much of those other muscle groups there are, they may turn that electrical energy into mechanical energy, into muscle contraction. That's energy that's not making it to the heart. So if you ever watch the TV shows where the patient, gets shocked on ER, any of those, medical sitcoms or whatever you want to call them, and the patient gets shocked and they hover above the bed and the lights flicker blue, which doesn't really happen. They're over exaggerating poor pad placement essentially. So where you want the anterior lateral pad placement is you want it essentially to the right of the mediastinum, above the nipple line, and under the left pit. This is probably one of the most common areas where you see pads misplaced. Usually they'll end up here at the right deltoid and, in line when the umbilicus down on the left lateral side. And that's the farther you migrate away from the heart, the more energy you lose. So here's kind of that orb or orbit or zone of the energy being delivered across the heart. The farther these pads migrate away, the more narrow that energy line becomes because the loss of energy of those other muscle groups occurs. So you have anterior posterior placement, and there's actually two versions. So version one is right at the mediastinum, and you take the left lateral pad and you put it just left of the spine at about the line or just below the line of the nipple line. So where it would have been on the left lateral side, under the pit, you just want to migrate to left of the spine on the posterior aspect. And the goal there is the energy is going to go through anterior to posterior across the myocardium. So it's going to go kind of up from the right atrium down around the left ventricle to the posterior aspect. So what you're doing here by changing these pad placements, you're changing the vector, changing the angle, changing that trajectory of the energy over the myocardium. Hopefully, depending on the thoracic density of the person, whether that's muscle, adipose tissue, other structures, you are going to hopefully get the reset of the myocardium you're looking for. And then version two is you actually take the anterior lead, put on left of the mediastinum on the anterior aspect, and you take the lateral pad and put it in the same place we did prior to. So it's that same line as it was before to the left of the spine. And there's actually other people that are trying different angles here. I honestly think this is probably one of the reasons dual sequential defibrillation kind of has its back and forth on its efficacy, because there's a couple different anterior posterior placements. So continuity of pad placement varies depending on which region, organization, or which study you're looking at. But anterior posterior, we have the version two, which they're both left of the mediastinum. One is on the anterior aspect, one's on the posterior aspect. And then I'll go back. Version one is anterior is right of the mediastinum, and then the posterior is left of the spine in the same margin or same line that it was on the lateral aspect. The other reason pad placement and changing pad placement can be beneficial is the way the heart actually is seated in different individuals can vary. So how your heart is actually implanted on you may vary based on, the person to your right or a family member. There's actually patients who have dextrocardia where the heart is actually flipped. So it's actually rotated from the right aspect in comparison to here where it's on the left aspect. So there's patients have different implantation and different angles of where their heart is actually seated. So changing pad placement can actually benefit those individuals. One is more lateral versus anterior, etc. The other thing we're trying to combat in a lot of instances is adipose tissue. So adipose tissue is fat. Fat is oil. Oil does not conduct electricity. It's actually what's used in transformers as a nerd out moment. So if you have a lot of adipose tissue, you don't have good conduction. So if you don't have good conduction, you don't have good transmittance of electricity. So another reason pad placement and or the addition of energy can be beneficial. Because when we deliver that energy, it's like dropping a pebble in the pond. The energy actually goes out and away. It's not only in one single line or one single axis between the pads. And that's where if you have other muscle or you increase the distance between your pads, you can lose that electrical energy or impulse. Again, we use stickers now. We don't use the paddles. We definitely need to be good about shaving our patients. The more hair they have, the less likely those pads are to be in contact with the skin. You don't want to have burnt hair smell on calls, number one. Number two, you want to have the maximum contact of those pads on the patient's skin. You need to shave them if they are hairy. This means continue CPR while somebody manscapes them in the areas where you need to put the pads, and then put the pads on. So don't be afraid to make a clear point of contact where those pads need to be. So the persistent refractory VFIB, that's VFIB that just keeps coming back. It's stubborn VFIB after you shock it. So a couple things to think about. Like, it is VFIB, it is disorganized, but I want you to reflect for a second. You have cellular activity, which means sodium potassium pump is working, which means there's enough cellular oxygenation that it is generating an electrical impulse. So especially with coarse VFIB, we have electricity to the heart. We just need to get it organized. So if we keep shocking it in the same fashion and it keeps coming back for more, imagine if, like, you're boxing, right? You watch a boxing match and somebody gets punched, boom, and they fall down, they get back up. They're like, what? And they keep going, and they get hit one more time. They fall down, they get back up. They're like, what? They get popped one more time. They get back up. They're like, what? They keep coming back for more. Or you have that friend that just is over the top, right? And you just can't get them to reset. You're like, knock it off. I'm like, what? You're like, stop. What? Right? They keep coming back for more. The core is there. In this case, the cellular energy is there. The cellular function is there. It's just not organized. We need to get it back in line and get it back working together as a cohesive unit. So if you've shocked them 3 times, they're still in VFib, you need to strongly consider getting off the deck and withholding your epinephrine. They don't need myocardial cell stimulation. They have it. What they need is myocardial cell organization and a nice rhythmic continuity to that electrical conduction. So if you have persistent refractory VFib, so what a lot of places have gone to is after the second VFib shock, you start this sequence of steps. So you shock once, they're in VFib, you get back on the chest, you do your things, the magic 2 minutes is up, the box of life still shows VFib, you shock it again, get back on the chest, squirt your drug, and then you start going down the sequence. Step 1, early on in the game though, check your pad placement, make sure it's not on like the right arm and the left hip, right? You want it nice and in the appropriate position. So make sure your pad placement is correct, because in a lot of instances when crap hits the fan, the person crashes in front of you, the person who's putting the pads on has a tendency to put them in places that are a little more extended, like you see here in this picture. You want them more nice and tight and in the pit, very much like that's on the pictures on the pads. We in our business love shapes and colors. Let's use this to our advantage. We have the shapes on the pads. So check your pad placement, make sure they're in the appropriate place. If that doesn't work on the next round of shop, try a new set of pads, get that second set of pads and try a new place, switch up the vector, change the angle, look to get a different approach or a different delivery to that energy across that myocardium. So step 2 would be fresh pads, new vector, change of vector. Think about you're playing paintball, right? And that you're trying to hit the person behind this little blue thing. You're going at it about this angle. You just keep hitting the little blue inflatable. If you change the angle to which you're attacking them, you might find them hiding behind there and be able to get them. That's what we're trying to do with that vector change. We're trying to deliver energy down a different vector in hopes to get a restart or reorganization of those heart cells. If that doesn't work, and if your organization allows it, this is where dual sequential defibrillation step 3 comes in. Now we have 2 sets of pads on 2 different vectors. Now we're going to add 2 different energy sources so that we get that refractory time extended. So now we're going to hit same energy at 2 different angles, back to back, dual sequence, 2 sequences, defibrillation. And we're going to do it back to back because we want to make that refractory time longer. So think about that stubborn phone you have or the electrical appliance, specifically maybe your computer. Your computer has capacitors in it, right? So what do they tell you to do? They tell you to unplug it, hold down the power button for 10 seconds, plug it back in and restart it up. The reason you're holding that power down for 10 seconds, you're trying to discharge the capacitor so that if there was any energy in that capacitor that was still allowing that circuit board to do the inappropriate thing, that gets discharged and you get a fresh restart. That's what we're looking for here with that dual sequential defibrillation. Our goal here is when we defibrillate one time, this is our defibrillation wave here. This is our reset time, and we hope to get reset. Now, if we don't get that, we want to use 2 sequences, increasing our refractory or our delivery time of energy in hope to get a reset. So it's like unplugging that appliance and holding down the power button for 20 seconds as opposed to 10 seconds. In this instance, we're delivering 2 amounts of the same energy over a longer period of time. So hopefully we can get that person, in this case, the heart cells, to reset. So go back to the boxing analogy. Person knocks them one time, they get back up. If they were to stand there and just go boom, 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 and pop them a bunch of times and knock them out, and then they get back up and they're like, hey, I quit, I'm done. That would essentially be dual sequential defibrillation. Person would be using 2 fists, 2 different angles, left jaw, right jaw, or left underjaw, right underjaw, to change the angle, different sides. And they're using impulsive or over 2 sequences or multi-sequence delivery. And so this is like a double jab, one on each side of the jaw. So the person kind of kicks out and then kind of wakes back up. It's like, you know what, I give up. I'm not going to fight. I surrender. And that's what we're looking for these heart cells to do. So when we go back to stubborn VFib, persistent refractory VFib, first round, check your pads. That's the first easy one, right? Person who puts the pads on probably threw them on too quick, maybe not in the right spot. Check them right off the bat. After that first discharge, just do that anyway, any cardiac arrest. They continue to be in VFib after your shocks. Throw on a new set of pads with a new angle, new vector. So if you had anterior lateral, do anterior posterior, whichever version you want your protocol tells you to do, go with it. That doesn't work. This is where, if you're allowed, you can try that 2-shock dual sequential defibrillation. As it stands today, that requires a second monitor. So, and practice, to be honest with you, because if you're doing it, you're having somebody hook up to the second set of pads, and please make sure whoever puts the pads on is the same person, because you don't want the first monitor defibrillator to be anterior and the second one to be like lateral posterior. Make sure the pads are on correctly and they're 2 different vector points, and that's when the ones you hook up to. Charge the same energy, shock, your turn, shock, and then you're trying to increase that refractory time that you deliver that energy. So we hope that helped. As always, if you have any questions, you can hit us up at info@lifelineemstraining.com. We hope you have a great day.